Hello and welcome back to another episode of Advanced RC Adventures. This is a channel where we investigate, explore, build and explain, upgrade and advance Nitro RCs to another level. Come start a new adventure with me. Today, we're bringing you another Nitro engine overview from one of the biggest and the best brands that so many of us in the hobby love, and that is OS. This is an OS Max series engine, and we have the 12 TR. Let's break this box open and start the adventure with this awesome club race engine. This is the OS TR in its sealed bag. It's been in long-term storage for a long period of time. It's great to have these types of vintage engines in the collection. We've got it in the sealed bag here. Let's pop it out and start the adventure. If you're going to have these engines in long-term storage, do your best to put in a sealed bag after you clean and lubricate. Put in a desiccant package if you can to try to keep out the moisture and keep your engines healthy for many, many years. Let's take a little look around, a little walk through this OS Max TR. Got a beautiful blue head. It's a smaller head than some of the other engines. It uses a 2-tier system with an underhead as well as the upper blue head. We'll take a look at that. It's a bump start engine. Like all of our engine overviews, we're going to take off the carb and have a little conversation, take off the back plate, look at the internals in the head, take the entire engine completely apart so everybody can see all of its goodness inside and have some fun doing it. So let's take off this carb and start things out. This uses a standard 6mm pinch bolt nut. This is considered a formal club race engine. And we're going to go over features about why I say that and why a lot of these OS now vintage discontinued club race engines are a lot better than people perhaps thought at the time, but they're definitely still sought out today. Let's go ahead and take a look at the carb. What's the first thing that you see that is notably different compared to other small block engines from OS? This is a well-designed insulated carb that's designed for more formal race applications. The 12 TR kind of lives in between its two sisters, the 12 TG and the 12 TZ. We've already taken a look at the 12 TZ on a prior episode, so feel free to go back and take a look at that adventure if you'd like. We are going to talk about the 12 TG and do a Nitro engine overview on it in the future, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. But since this 12 TR kind of lives in between those two engines I mentioned, let's talk about horsepower. This engine is rated at 1.1 horsepower, while the 12 TG, depending on its version, range between 0.7 and 0.9, with a considerably less RPM range than the TR. And then the 12 TZ that we looked at has a horsepower claim of 1.5. So again, this lives somewhere in between. There were two different flavors, so to speak, of the 12 TR. It had a rotary carb and a slide carb like this version. Both of them had insulated carburetors. These are a 2-needle carb. We have our high-speed needle here. We have our low-speed needle there. Has a relatively standard butyl O-ring down below on the neck. Let's give this carburetor neck a little measure. You can see how different it is. So on the CVR versions of the engines, it's a 10mm. This is a 13mm bore. So it's a lot bigger on the outside, a lot cooler temperatures with that insulated lower neck. And the overall design of the car is a lot better than, for example, the CVR series. A lot of these features about the 12 TR is more race related. This is still in the OS Max version or a series of engines, but it's on the top tier, the upper level tier of these club race engines. It's different than the CVRs. The side exhaust 12 CVR that we're going to take a look at a future episode has the same horsepower output, or very similar to this, but it has a side exhaust. This uses a rear exhaust and definitely doesn't have all of the same features that this 12TR has. Let's take off this back plate here. These use a 2mm hex. And before we pop off that back plate, let's go ahead and take a look at the bolt. Let's give it a little measure. All right, so this is a topic that I don't want to make very long, but it's important to me to provide information to everyone out there. So this measures at 2.51, and the reason people can be confused about what bolts to use is because there's two very similar size bolts that OS and other manufacturers like to use, especially for the backplate bolts. It's very, very common to have a 2.5mm bolt compared to a 2.6mm bolt, which is what this OS12TR has. Both the 2.5 and the 2.6 uses the exact same thread pitch. And when they're manufactured, the size range, the outer diameter of the threads, can overlap. So there's a good chance you can put a 2.5mm bolt inside of here as long as it's a high quality manufactured bolt and it's on the upper end of the tolerance range. What you want to be careful of is if you try to put a 2.5mm bolt inside of those holes and it's a low quality, the physical size, the diameter of the threads can be too small. It will thread into these holes because it's the exact same thread pitch, but you have a higher probability of stretching the threads or stripping out the hole. So the main thing I want to say is look at your instruction manual, use your dial calipers, make some measurements, take a look at specifications of the bolts, and then you can make a determination if you can use a high quality 2.5mm bolt inside of your engine, or do you have to go out to a very now rare 2.6mm size. And I'll leave it at that. Let's go ahead and take off that back plate. Make sure your piston is in the up position. Wiggle off your back plate. So here's something interesting with this particular engine. This is a non-interference engine. Notice there is no cutout or partial cutout for the piston skirt. It's perfectly smooth and round all the way on that back plate. So there's no designation for top or bottom for this one. This uses a nice big butyl O-ring for the seal inside of this back portion of the block. Take a look at the internals there. Beautiful connecting rod. We're going to take a look at that as we continue the disassembly. So let's pop off the head and keep it going. So here we go, we got the head off. Notice I mentioned before, this uses a lower head or a button head. We'll take a look at that here in a second. Since we're measuring those other bolts, let's go ahead and measure this too. This is the same size as the backplate bolts. These are M2.6, measured out exactly at 2.5. Let's take a look at the length. So this is a 12mm length bolt, which is relatively standard for most 12 size engines. Pick up the head here. This is a bidirectional head. That means that airflow can go in through one direction and out the other, but it cannot go through the other ways. The head itself has a taper towards the top, nice big shine cuts on the side, beautiful thin fins, which will help to keep this club racer nice and cool on the track. take off the button here. This is a standard plug button. Has a nice big opening for the combustion bowl there. And I believe it has one shim, and I'm fairly confident from the last time I tore it down, it's either 2 or 3. This is a 0.2. So it's slightly smaller head shim stack for a 12, but it's right there in the ballpark between 0.2 and 0.4 for a 12. Let's take this sleeve out. We'll take a look at this in just a moment. Flip it over and get the piston and rod assembly out. Take our crank out. Let's go ahead and talk about the crank right now. This is not your average 12 CVR crank. It's not drilled or filled, but it's got a nice machine ramped inside. Bigger bearings. The balance lobe here is relatively standard. Uses a standard crank and even has the 2 flats on this particular crankshaft. So allows for easy connection with either a collet or flywheels that use those 2 flats there. Standard rod journal. Let's go ahead and measure that inner induction bore. This is a 7mm induction bore with a nice big opening for this 12 TR. Let's go over to the block. I love these beautiful matte gray aluminum blocks, and then with the shine cuts there for the OS Max 12 TR. Exact same thing there, mirrored on this side. Rear exhaust. Chrome steel bearings front and rear. And some nice big porting for the transfer ports, the boost port, and the exhaust port. But it's not very fancy inside. It's just nice big open windows or open porting for airflow to get into the cylinder. Let's move over to the piston itself. This is a cast piston and then later machined. It has one oil groove there on top to help keep that compression sealed and the piston lubricated. These connecting rods are beautiful. It's got a decent knife edge on them, and it is an extreme upgrade compared to the 12 CVR. Brass bushings pressed top and bottom with an oil groove, but notice that the piston skirt, there's no cutout at all. In addition, it has a captured wrist pin. It has 2 clips, one on either side, for a pretty robust system for this piston and connecting rod assembly on this 12 TR. Now let's move over to the piston sleeve itself. Notice the color. This is an ABC construction engine. We have an aluminum piston, we have a brass sleeve, and there's chrome lining down on the interior of the sleeve. This is definitely one big upgrade over the 12TG, which has nickel coating on the outside, but when we talk more about the 12TG, we'll talk about how that particular nickel coating is special on that piston sleeve. It's not your traditional ABN style engine. Let's look at the porting here. Nice big exhaust window. There's no dog ears, but there is a bevel on that lower side of the window. We have transfer ports. These are big. This particular engine could definitely use a little bit of modification, putting a fang here or some bevels. There is a very small hint of a bevel on that lower side of the transfer port, but there's not much. And then on that mirrored side, have the same transfer port, nice and long. And then we can move over to the boost port. This particular boost port reminds me of some of the Novarossi 12 boost ports. All about the same width and size, but it has a very big lower leading edge bevel, taking from that porting on the block and going up inside of that boost port to help charge and clear the chamber of exhaust. We have a decent lower beveled edge to help with that CFM or flow to get inside of the porting. This 12 TR engine is a great example on how you can still have some really good power from your club race engine, but have a lot of different features like better bearings, bigger connecting rod, better carb design, especially insulation, rear exhaust for efficiency and better response, and a lot better crank and combustion chamber designs to have increased and more linear power output. If you like these style engine reviews, especially of these discontinued OS small block 12 race style engines, then feel free to like, share, and subscribe. And if you like 10 scale, nitro, and especially touring cars, then this is the place to be, and thanks for taking the adventure with me.